So what we need to do is we need to show people that we're collecting data on people because we can actually use it to improve their quality of life, to be proactive in people's care. So this morning is very much, this afternoon, sorry, is very much about how we use some of that data to actually give people the best possibilities, the best quality of life, and allow us to care and support them as best we can. So we have a value creation model. The value creation of anything we do with data should be providing for the quality of life for the person. It should also be helping an organization to function better, to provide value for the people it's caring for, and also for the wider health and care system as a whole. Because if we are healthier, if people have a greater quality of life, then that obviously benefits the health and care system, which we know is under pressure at the moment. So today, we're very lucky to have Peter Gore, founder of ADL Smartcare, Activities of Daily Living Smartcare, ADL Smartcare, who will set the scene for us about what, how his model shows how we can actually improve people's lives by actually delineating certain activities of daily living and take them forward and help people.
So I'm just going to do this in the context, or talk about data in the context of care and domiciliary care as an example of what you can do. There are obviously plenty of other places you can do this, but I just thought this would be an interesting and perhaps pertinent example, given that we don't really have enough capacity in the system. So I'm going to talk about older people, not because they're the only people that matter, but they're the people that I understand best. That's my background, is in healthy aging and technology. So I'm going to focus on older people, and just bear with me, suspend the incredulity for a minute, and let's just imagine a future where we could improve an individual's well-being, we could create more capacity in the care system, a way to value our caregivers, professional caregivers better. And we might be able to afford to reward our caregivers better as well. So that's where I'm trying to go with this. You might wonder whether that's possible, and I'm going to show you why I think that it is and why I think the evidence supports it. So first thing is just how inevitable is aging. So if there's really nothing that we can do about it, whatever we know about people, then probably my vision here is doomed. However, that's not true. How we age is about 25% genetic, about 75%. So it's from the genetic side, from your mitochondrial DNA, so from your mother. And the other 75% is about the choices that we can and do make. Clearly, people in more deprived circumstances have less good choices, typically, which is why they, on average, have about 18 less healthy life years in England, which is awful and needs fixing. So we can do something about it. The problem is that what a lot of people, perhaps even most people, think about aging is only about 25% true. It's actually, we have all sorts of ideas that we get from all sorts of places, and they're not based in the evidence. So let's just talk about that for a minute. So this is a chap who accidentally took up marathon running at 85, around 40 marathons till he was 104, said been there, done that. Still runs a path of seat routinely. He's 114 now. The reason I give him as an example, apart from that he's a bit of a hero for me, is that if we use certain language about him, so we talk about the clinical frailty scale, he's 1 out of 7. And the OED describes frail as weak and delicate. I wouldn't regard somebody who runs a path of seat, which I've done myself, and it's hard work, at 114 as frail by any measure. So we need to be careful about our language, because if we talk about somebody as frail when they're clearly not, we just disengage with them. Why does it matter? Why does our attitude matter, and how we explain things to people? Well, this evidence is based on an Irish study, the Irish longitudinal study of aging. 8,000 people, if they had a negative stereotype of aging, 2 years later, they would be walking more slowly and they'd be more cognitively declined, adjusting for all other factors. So if we have a negative stereotype of aging, that dooms us to age less well. But that's something that we can fix. So now I'm going to use a framework to show what happens that we might be able to intervene. So this is all data-driven, since we're talking about data. So these are things down the left-hand side that you won't be able to do as you get older. Now, when I say get older, 2% of men in England, 3% of women can't cut their toenails at 42. But I can find you a small group of women in California who can still do that at 100. So we're talking about a 58-year age range when you might start on here. The median age is actually 79. The 4 pre-markers in the blue zone are things that they're a loss of physical fitness and capacity, but before you start to experience this list of 15. Why do these 15 things matter? They're not the only things that we do or want to do. The reason they matter is that people say they'd rather die than not be able to do them. That was a survey back in 2012, because we do these things every day and take them for granted. And actually, when you find you can't do those things and you start to become dependent on others, that's not something people would typically choose. So what does this look like? I've shown 2 different sort of indicative curves. Let's just look at a journey. We'll have Bert and we'll split him into 2. We'll have an upper Bert and a lower Bert. So here's the trajectories that upper Bert and lower Bert took. The important thing about this, and this is the theory behind compression of functional decline, which was published, you could download a copy of it if you want, it's open access, is there's essentially no real difference, maybe a few months at most, between life expectancy between upper Bert and lower Bert. So upper Bert stayed at full wash, essentially, for however long this period is, and lower Bert carried on declining. The difference between them is what they were able to do, not their life expectancy. So upper Bert simply enjoyed more better years and then declines very quickly at the end, whereas lower Bert bumped along the bottom for quite some time. So that's what compression of functional decline's like. Here's how you do it. Here's how you can do it. So the first thing is we call it build reserve. So you can delay starting on the life curve clearly for a long time if some are on it at 42 and some not at 100. So we can push that back. We build the foundations of being able to push that back across the life course. So starting in our childhood, we can build those foundations, but you can still build better foundations much later on in life, to really quite a lot later in life. So anyway, we can obviously delay it by building reserve. That's what we call it. If you lose an ability, it turns out you can get it back. You can't, that doesn't just happen by trying to do it. You actually need to work at particular things. But if you lose an ability and you do the right kind of exercises and training, you can get that ability back. Or if you can't or don't want to do those, to do exercise to get an ability back, you can use equipment to compensate for a loss of ability, which means you're still able to remain independent without relying on others. And ultimately, care has a really important role in that people who can't or aren't or don't want to make those decisions, or have got to a point where they can't do those things, will need to be cared for by others, friends, family members, or professional caregivers. And at every stage, not just the life curve stages, but everything that we want to do, we can make these decisions. Do I want to work to keep that or get that ability back, or am I going to compensate or get somebody else to do it for me? And that'd be great. If we could do that en masse with lots of people, then we could really make a difference. I'll show you some of the numbers in a second. But we do have a bit of an issue. And that's because we've got health and social care staff who are maxed out already, can't get enough of them, can't get enough of their time even when we have them. So the question is, what I'm going to suggest is an idea of how we might be able to address that problem without simply just throwing more money at it. or even if we could get the people. And the question is, are there people with the people that we want to help that we could use? And in fact, it turns out, of course, obviously, that professional caregivers are with the older people, often living in the community. Not all of them, of course, but those that live in the community, they're typically with them providing some level of care. Could we use that as a means of reaching those people and perhaps shaping the way they age, so shaping their functional decline trajectories, if you like? Of course, even if we could persuade those people to do it, we then have to persuade the people that they're with, the people receiving care, to do exercises or whatever. But when you ask them, it turns out that 60% say yes. Huge surprise to me, if I'm honest, but 60% said yes. But if we did those things, if we could do that, then maybe we could save more capacity in the care system, provide more satisfying jobs for professional caregivers, and share some of the savings with them so that it would be a better rewarded profession, which might solve a whole bunch of other problems.
People often think deterioration is a one-way street.
Yeah.
And it
really,
it's not.
really isn't. And what I forgot to mention was that for every stage you go down the life curve, your healthcare costs go up £640 per person per year. And that's
thoughts on, applying these concepts in a care home setting where, clearly people are much more stressed, stretched, and they know that they would conduct a specific set of activities, perhaps, which are not still widely bespoke based on the needs as much.
So that you can do it in care homes. People, in fact, it was one of the challenges that got me going on doing this was somebody came and said, well, can we do this for the people that we care for? And if I'm absolutely honest, I thought probably not by the time you get them. And he could see that on my face. And he said, I thought you said anybody could be re-abled. So I went and looked. And you can go into a care home, give people stretchy bands, and in 6 weeks, you will objectively, as measured by DEXA scanners and dynamometers, increase their muscle mass and strength 108%. Now, it won't last forever, and they'll need to keep working on it, but you definitely can do it. And what you get is better gait, better stair climbing ability, so lower risk of falls, which is obviously one of the big risks in care homes anyway. So it can be done. It's just we seem to put all the energy into fixing things and none of the energy into stopping things being fixed. And I can't quite get my head around that. I suppose it's because health interventions are almost always sort of after the fact, aren't they? That's not quite true. We do some prevention now, but that's relatively new. I think because we don't believe we can change the way we age, then why would you try? So that's really one of my key points is convincing people that you can change the trajectory of how people age. If you believe that, you'll behave differently. So that's what I do, is going around local authorities. That's the reason that we're in Australia, is that the Australian Department of Health came to us in lockdown and said, we aren't going to have more money after COVID. We have a massive care bill. They spend, I think, about $20 billion Aussie dollars a year on care. And they're a younger country than us and a third of the size. So that's a lot of money. And they said, we won't have any more money. We can't afford it. We need new ideas. And so we had a discussion, and then this became a program called Live Up in Australia, where it's trying to engage with people and encourage them to believe it can be different and then take action to realize that, the extent to which they want. It's not about telling people what they should do.
And absolutely right. And I think it's a combination of, that psychological behavioral change as well, apart from looking at, you gave a very interesting example there, activities, and that directly translate into reduction in the number of falls. And there is this two, very strong lead and, follow-on indicators that people can start looking at without spending a lot of money on activities as such, but taking baby steps to really unearth what data can tell us about things.
Use it. And something we come across, and something I've seen a lot with the implementation of electronic healthcare and social care records around the place, is the amount of training it takes. A lot of people, even now, in a survey I only read this morning, they feel like they need more training on this. And I was just wondering, Peter, how much training is involved with, especially with unpaid carers as well, and involving them and getting them up to speed on not just what the activities they'll need to do, but the recording of the data as well.
So we record all the stuff that they do in there. So they're just really answering basic questions, and all of that data is then going back into a system where we can analyze that and do whatever matching. I think it has been an issue. Obviously still is an issue to a degree. I think that's changing. Some of it is, so I think something like 50% of under 35-year-olds are offered apps, prescribed apps, health apps by their GPs. That drops to something like 20% if you're 55 plus, and if you're 65 plus to like 10% or something. But it's not because people say they can't use an app, it's because the GP doesn't think they can, so we don't offer it them. Starting to get people ask us to do is to link data between sensors, and essentially what we have built into the system is an understanding of how people age, a very detailed one about how they age and how their environment might affect that, so that the context in which you can bring sensor data and say, okay, for this person, you might want to do this approach. For this person, you might want to do this. We haven't actually done it in practice yet. We are talking to some of the NHS people.
Using sort of wearable devices, so Fitbits, people do step tracking and that sort of thing. Do you think sort of in the future, as people get older and people are more aware of their own health because they're tracking it day to day, that people's attitudes are sort of changing as a result of that and may change in the future? Or do you think people will still need to be encouraged in the same way?
There's a mix there. What I'd say is important, so it's great to do those things. I mean, I wear a Garmin watch. I got a new one for Christmas. It's great. It tells me how long I need to rest after my last run and all that kind of stuff. It's brilliant. But then I'm not really, in fact, I'm not experiencing age-related decline at this point, and I'm determined to push that back until 2 days before I drop dead, if I can. What we need to get over to people, though, is that you need to do certain things in order to, it's not just anything to stop the way you age. So, for instance, all exercise is activity, but not all activity is exercise. And there are particular things that you need to do if you look at the evidence. So for somebody who's walking more slowly, there are only two things. This is a survey of 250 different studies around walking speed. So it's a study of studies, meta-study, and it showed only two things that affect people's walking speed. So they'll get slower with age, or can do, depending on what they're doing. Even if they're wearing a Fitbit and they're tracking it, it's not going to, it's just going to tell them they're walking more slowly. There are only two things that will safely improve your walking speed. One I love and one I hate. The one I love is strength training. So that can just be stretchy bands or squats with weights or even body weight. But that works, but you have to do it at a certain level. You have to push your body to what they call 80% of 1 rep max. So you actually have to work quite hard. And then what happens is the body says, oh, you want to do that, do you? And starts growing muscles back. That's the first way. The second way, which I hate, is dancing with a rhythmic component or movement with a rhythmic component. I always said I would never do dancing. I'm your worst nightmare on the dance floor. So I'll just do the strength training. But it does work. And I do know somebody who goes, they're in their 60s, they go dancing every week, and it keeps them mobile and fit. And because actually dancing is fairly functional. it's doing the kinds of things, the movement, the balance, all of those kinds of things that you need. So that has an impact, but cardiorespiratory training doesn't seem to evidentially improve it. So that's where we need to bring the aging evidence in, so that we give people the things. So for instance, if we offer you exercises, they'll be different at every stage, because we've used aging exercise specialists to say what is causing this loss at this stage, so that we can focus on those specific things to get you back quickly.
So what you showcase for me, Peter, is the fact that there's personal data, that individual data that people should be looking out for themselves about their own progress or deterioration when it's happening, and also then the data that you were saying. Now, with some colleagues, Katie and I were in the States recently, and one thing in the States, it's for all the deficiencies of the system, there is a can-do attitude in many cases, and also they're not afraid to talk about money. So with that figure that you said there of saving £640 per person for each level, I think is a really important thing to get over, for us to open that this is in some way not just about money, but about resources that we have, which are limited. Therefore, if we can actually spread the resources to be used in other ways, I think so that's the two areas of data. The individual, what you characterize for me is that individual data, and that individual data being accumulated up to actually make a difference in the whole system.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult. It is about changing mindset of people that are out there supporting. I work as an independent consultant, particularly around compliance and governance, and CQC compliance. And I see, I go around and I see a lot of opportunity perhaps missed. Carers that are working with vulnerable people who actually, if they're shown the right way of being able to provide that support and enable them to be as independent as they can be, things would improve. I think it's twofold, really. I mean, I'm quite passionate about keeping healthy and keeping active. What you're doing, Peter, is really, it shouldn't be difficult, but it's being able to demonstrate and show data and show improvement, and just being able to empower people of whatever stage in life to begin to take accountability for keeping themselves well, and not having that mindset of, well, I've paid my national insurance and I can't do this anymore, so people will have to look after me.
I work for Chef Care, and we've got 9 care homes across the city, and I'm working with OTs at the moment, but part of my new job would be looking at things exactly like this, because obviously you're in a position where people can easily become institutionalized, and we need to be looking at doing it differently and enabling people as much as we can. We have got exercise providers that are being relaunched, and I'm working with a young company who are looking at new ways of doing things. And Peter talks about the bands, and they're playing an important part of that and making a big difference. I don't think we're at the stage where we're taking it to as far as we could or should. I mean, one of the presentations that I heard of, that I was part of recently, talked about armchair exercises really not having as much of an impact than you'd probably hope that they would. And I think care homes have very much got that mindset that I mean, it's great to have people around doing armchair exercises, but it needs to be something with more of an impact.
With regards to activities, what we have seen is many times activities are considered as some department's job. There will be an activities coordinator or an activities manager who will come and do a set of activities, and that's where the definition of activities end. And with many of the care homes that we work with, we often challenge that thought, and we say that's not right way of looking at activities, because we live our lives, we don't do activities in our general life. So any activity should be part and the role of all the caring team, all the people who are working in the care home setting, not talking about home care or dom care at this point of time. And wherever we have seen there is a change in the operating model where activities becomes part and parcel of any carer, be it housekeeper, be it the dining assistants roles and responsibilities, there's a huge difference in the quality of care and quality of life KPIs for the residents. I was listening about how can we start quantifying the savings, and the thought arose while showcasing that savings at the macro level, at NHS level perhaps it's difficult, but how about the organizational level savings? Is there a way how using that data it could be demonstrated? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean, I guess the challenge in a market that has sort of almost unfettered demand on the system, that savings are unlikely to be realizable. They're more likely to be redeployable. So, you don't need somebody to do this because actually these people are helping themselves or whatever. So it's about shifting resources. The other challenge we have with some of this is you can't predict what somebody's trajectory will be in advance. So that's a limitation to this. However, what you can say is that, and I have this from a colleague who's she's retired now, although she still writes papers, but one of the top epidemiologists of aging in the world, and she says nobody naturally improves as they age. So anybody who's gone up a stage, that's unnatural. Somebody did something that changed them. So that's what you need to look for. But also, I think we always want to find money. And I think perhaps what we need to do is look at how busy people are, the capacity in the system, and then see, are we giving the system space to breathe? So people aren't seeing quite as many cases, but or the demand, we're coping with the demand better or whatever. But at the moment we've got, and this for me, this is part of the problem with some of the financial side of it. We have 2.58 million older adults, over 65, in England with an unmet need. We have to change people's expectations of how they're aging, and also the fact that they have some responsibility for that. Healthy aging is not about what people do to you or for you, though that can help. It's also about what you do for and to yourself. Maybe that's not very politically correct or helpful or whatever, but it's the truth.